Welcome, everyone. It is the Friday before Halloween, and we are in our fourth episode of this fantastic series with Tim Wyatt on death and reincarnation and karma, the after-death states. This episode tonight with Tim. As you can see, we both dressed up for it. He's wearing a special tie. Oh, he took it off. Did you take off your tie? Oh, no, there it is. And I, of course, am wearing this lovely gown. Getting into the mood, we're going to be talking about tonight evidence of reincarnation, and we'll be talking about actual ghosts. What are they? So, ladies and gentlemen, Tim is returning with us. If you are new here and you don't know who Tim Wyatt is, Tim is an esoteric author. He's a broadcast journalist. He's also a dedicated student of the ancient teachings. And we're going to be going in depth with him tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage the one and only Tim Wyatt. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you very much indeed, Anne. Good to be here as always.
Well, I have to say thank you so much. We've done 4 of these, and I always leave thinking, oh, I want to know more, and I'll be doing stuff during the week, and I'm thinking, oh, I should have asked him this and that, and we get questions coming in. Thank you, thank you, thank you. For those of you who are here, you'll see on the screen Firewheel Books. This is Tim's website, and we'll be talking and dipping into this book that you'll see on the screen as well. This is everyone's Book of the Dead. Again, there's the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Tim Wyatt has written this book, so you can have your own Book of the Dead. This is everyone's Book of the Dead. There's also Cycles of Eternity and so much more if you want to know more. So as we begin tonight, getting ready for this time of year, everybody is thinking about the afterlife, it seems. And we wanted to touch first on the evidence of reincarnation. Tim, take it away.
One of the great difficulties in trying to prove reincarnation or even provide evidence for it is that people of a materialist way of thinking want physical proofs. But what goes on in these after-death states isn't physical at all, and therefore it's very difficult to offer physical proofs. There are a number of ways, though, that I think we can see evidence of rebirth. And the strongest one for me is a deep sense of intuition that I've been here before. And I've had this since I was a child, and I've come across other people who feel equally convinced despite our upbringing in the Christian tradition. There are other bits of evidence which have been studied in great depth. There's been a lot of work in near-death experiences as medical science improves and people are brought back to life who otherwise would have died. And they seem to drift off into something like the after-death state. Some of these have been extremely well documented. Some people come into this life with fears and phobias which seem completely irrational. People suffer from claustrophobia or a fear of open spaces or spiders or the color yellow or something like this. And this, I think, often suggests that people may have been somewhere before. Sometimes there is the familiarity with places. You go to a strange city and you feel that you've been here before and you know where different shops and buildings are. Sometimes people start to speak strange languages, which they have no knowledge of, and which perhaps are even extinct languages. Sometimes people have just flashes. They watch something on the television or they have a conversation, and they get this flash of intuition that they have been here before. So these are some of the ways that we can look at this. Another way that I think offers great evidence is people of genius. Because people like Mozart and Einstein and all the other geniuses don't come into this life as a blank sheet. They must have done some work in previous lives to get where they are now. So I think when you put all this together, there is a fairly persuasive case, not necessarily for the materialists, that there is strong evidence for rebirth.
Another that they're doing research on is the birthmarks. I think there was one child that actually remembered where his body was buried and where he was murdered. And then they dug that body up and there was a wound where this particular birthmark was. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there was a man called Dr. Ian Stevenson who did an awful lot of work on this. And he worked in India and did thousands and thousands of cases and checked mortuary records, medical records, and often found cases where people would have a mark here where they had been shot in the head or a knife mark on the neck or something like that. And the number of correlated cases was far, far above what chance would have it.
I did a search online before we did these, and I'm trying to see, is anybody else trying to explain what this is? There's some stuff out there, but as far as what are ghosts and proof of reincarnation, there's more than there was a few years ago, but there's not as many as I thought there would be. So the fact that we're actually covering this, and where are we getting this information? The people are asking me, how do we have the right to have this conversation, you and I, to say what we know? Is it from the Tibetan and the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Theosophical teachings? Is it the perennial philosophy? Is it the near-death experiences coming back with the proof? Where are we getting this information to say what we know or understand?
Well, it comes from a wide variety of sources, and much of it is contained in the ageless wisdom teachings, which have always been there, but which from time to time get buried and get suppressed. But they always exist underground, and they always erupt into the mainstream again eventually, most recently with things like the Theosophical Society and Rudolf Steiner and other 20th and 19th century mystics and occultists. So this stuff has come from there, but medical science itself has actually produced quite a wide body of evidence. One of the most interesting books, and it's not so much about the afterlife, although it could be, is a man called Dr. Eben Alexander, who wrote this book called Proof of Heaven. And he was a skeptic, materialistic neurosurgeon. And he had meningitis and went into this 7-day coma and went through all these different worlds and had this incredible experience. And like most people who go through these kind of near-death experiences, he came out of it completely changed in his spiritual views and having no fear whatsoever of death. So I think these near-death experiences are similar to what we experience. You wanted to talk about ghosts and specters and spooks and that sort of thing.
Yes, please. I do want to talk about that. They love the scare. They love the hunt. But there's not a lot of time spent on what it is that they're experiencing. Are these like the stone tapes? Is this like a tape that plays over and over again without any energy? Is it actually a shell? What is an astral shell?
Well, once human beings die and their energizing principle, their energy body dies a little while after that, they have an astral body, which is a template of everything physical. This is sometimes called the desire body. And this goes to the astral world, where over a period of time, it's processed so that all the nasty stuff is taken away from it. It's a purification process, and it's probably alluded to in the Christian purgatory. And people spend a variety of time there. You know, it could be a very short time, it could be decades in earth terms. And here, once everything is purified, what is left is what's called an astral shell. So it's like all the residue and not the good stuff that's been saved in what we call a permanent atom to be revived in one's next life. This is all the dross material, and it's called an astral shell. Sometimes these can be occupied by other entities, by elementals and other spirits, some of which are quite malign. And it's a bit like a sea creature taking over the shell of another sea creature. So in seances, for example, when people are talking to someone they think is Uncle John, what they're talking to is the astral shell of Uncle John that has been occupied by, you know, some much more primitive thing. And therefore, that's why you never hear anything interesting in seances. It's just really banal stuff, usually, if you go to a spiritualist church or something like that. No one tells you what it's like on the other side. It's just, oh, I'm missing you, and I hope the family are doing well. So this shell is not the person at all. It's just got the vaguest imprints of it. And bears the slightest resemblance to the person.
Are the mediums reading from the person sitting in the room where that information comes through, which is a validation? But you're right. They never actually give any new information or talk about their own journey. It's just validations of I am who I say I am. Like, remember the shoes that are tucked under that chest or strange things like that. There's nothing really outside the norm. How are the mediums picking up the information from the people sitting in the audience? Do you know?
Journalists and police officers have all sorts of different ways of extracting information. And as a journalist, I know this. So they do it in a variety of sources, but some people, some mediums can contact the astral world, but what they're reading as a rule is these astral shells. And in all the esoteric literature, there's a great warning about the dangers of trying to communicate with people once they've passed on, for a number of reasons. The chief one being that you're somehow creating an attachment with that astral body on its onward journey, and you might be impeding it in some way.
The elementals that you mentioned that are activating this shell, is the elemental feeding off the energy of the grief and the sadness of the person sitting? Is that what's happening?
That could be the case. And the length of time that these devitalized shells exist depends on how much energy is in them, if they are still motivated by strong desires. And one of the things I was going to say is that when people die, and we alluded to this in another of our talks, sometimes they don't actually realize for a period of time that they're dead. And this is because of habit. They go back to the same house, they go to the same office where they work, they try and mix with the same people until they realize no one's listening to them. But sometimes, because of unfinished business or because of attachment to places or locations, people will stay in that place, possibly for hundreds of years. And this is why you might see, a knight clunking along a corridor late at night, because some kind of energy imprint still remains. And this is maybe what the paranormal ghost hunters are picking up. And I'm not just talking about knights. It could be something that's much more recent, someone who's passed on in the last 5, 10, 15 years or so, leaving their imprint on this place because they're still attached to it in some way.
What about the, I want to say, energy presence that comes through on Ouija boards? What would you say that is?
There is something called the astral light, which is kind of like a universal medium where all things past, present, and future are stored. Some people claim to be able to tap into that. The Ouija board is just one of a number of divination systems, such as the I Ching or the tarot cards, both of which I use. I don't know much about Ouija boards, but what they do is they act as a conduit. They enable some invisible kind of influence or energies to be transmitted through you, either by throwing coins or drawing cards or pushing the Ouija board about. It doesn't really matter how you do it. Some people do it with automatic writing, but they are able to connect to something beyond themselves. And I know, having used the I Ching for more than 50 years, it's an incredibly accurate reading of these things.
I'm sure you've seen online just the massive amounts of footage of ghosts, and you actually see the physical manifestation. You can see through them. Some of it is, what do they call it, pareidolia, when it looks like a face, but it's really not a face, but you're actually able to see because everybody's got in their pocket a camcorder. So we're getting lots more footage of these things, these hauntings. You hear the banging, you hear the knocking, you see the mists, you see the black shadows. Do you feel that in just a matter of time, possibly, just like the UFOs, is that we're going to be, yeah, that's right, of course they're here, because we've seen the proof? Do you think that we're actually getting there?
Oh, I'd most certainly agree it's the case. And I think technology is going to probably be of great assistance here, because I think what's happening with these hauntings and people seeing these various things, it's not happening on the normal plane of existence. It's happening either on the etheric planes, which are the planes above solids, liquids, and gases, or it's happening on the astral plane. And these two will tend to blend over into each other. So it's happening in much finer states of reality than science as yet accepts exist. But these cameras are able to pick these things up. And I suspect as these things get more sophisticated, which they do all the time, when you can take a picture of a galaxy that's 1.3 trillion years away, light years away, then, getting pictures in a darkened room, no problem at all. So I think that more and more footage like this is going to emerge. And whether people will be able to identify what it is, I don't know. But people have to understand that there are more subtle levels of reality in order to, I think, explain this in a satisfactory way.
Thank you for that. Hollywood seems to make it out to be, and really has played this up, and it's big in the American Bible Belt, is that the ghosts are often demons. What are your thoughts on that? As far as, I mean, there can be dark forces, but not all of them are dark. What are your thoughts about the intent or the malice behind these entities, or are they just doing their thing and we are just observing?
Well, I think this is chiefly a phenomenon born of two things. And one is fundamentalist evangelical Christianity on the one hand and Hollywood on the other. You know, it's a toxic blend of turning everything into demons. And this is what they did, of course, in the Middle Ages, isn't it? Nature spirits, the finer forces of nature, were banished as being the work of the devil. The angels were okay, but the lesser nature spirits, which operate all around us, were banished, and people were discouraged from, communing with them. And we've just done exactly the same thing now. All ETs, anything from out of this world, is instantly hostile to us, is an enemy. And the same with invisible forces. They have to be the work of the devil. So Christian iconography, Christian thinking still dominates people's perception, reinforced by Hollywood.
Completely the truth. I can't tell you how many comments I get that will say that. Absolutely. And it seems so. I go, the year is 2023. You're acting like it's 1410. What's the matter? But that seems to be, I don't know, maybe we'll get there. We'll get there after a while. But I think there's so much interest in the paranormal that I think that might help people understand there's more than just the physical world, and possibly to find out what it is we're looking at. So before we come to a close, I wanted to ask you two more questions. One is, what is it that you think we see? Is this an emisted apparition? You can see through this entity, but it has the shape and every other feature of a human. What could we say we identify this as in esoteric terms, an easy esoteric term? What is it?
Well, it could be a number of things. It could be something from the astral world. It might be some kind of etheric imprint. But it's basically very subtle energies which are retained on their own level and which most people cannot see. In the early days of spiritualism, various things were manifested, and the medium then was called ectoplasm. There are pictures of ectoplasm spewing out of mediums' mouths and everything. I mean, much of this was proved to be fakery, but whether ectoplasm or some other subtle type of substance exists or not, I don't know. I suspect it does. But I don't think that people are all seeing exactly the same thing, because there are a number of different phenomena, and they're quite complicated, so we don't really have time to go into them here. But there's a number of different explanations for what people could be seeing.
There's a lot of great YouTube channels out there. I want to throw out Goose Pimples is one, Slapped Ham is another. The footage that they bring in on these is mind-blowing. And 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, we would have thought there's no way. But now that everybody's got a camera, we're getting the proof, for lack of a better word. My final question to you, Tim, is have you ever seen a ghost?
Yes, I have. When I bought my first house back in the 1970s, one Sunday afternoon, I was just sitting on the stairs for some reason. And we had some friends round in the front room, and I just gone out of there just to get a breath of fresh air. And I heard the front door go, and I heard these voices and footsteps, and I saw a man in a very old-fashioned suit with like a top hat on, and a woman in a long crinoline-type dress. And the man said, "Oh, wasn't that a wonderful evening, darling?" She said, "Oh, yes." And they disappeared. That's the only time I've ever seen anything like that. So maybe these were the former occupants of the house that I lived in, because it was quite an old Victorian house.
I love that. That is perfect. Now, do you find that when people, have you told this story, do people believe you? Do you think they believe you more now? Do you ever share that story nowadays?
I'm very selective with whom I share it.
Oh, and you shared it with us? Thank you so much. Happy Halloween weekend. Thank you for being here when the veil is the thinnest between the worlds. We are so lucky to have had you for 4 episodes. This is our fourth. But remember, if you want more, Tim, and I know that you do, I want you to go to firewheelbooks.co.uk. You can get yourself a copy of this book, which is Everyone's Book of the Dead. We also have a playlist. Well, there's also Cycles of Eternity and other works over there as well. But we have a playlist of all of Tim's talks, or most of them I've gathered, and I'll put that down below. I also have can I share your music playlist as well so they can see how multi-talented you are?
If you wish, yes.
I think it was Jonathan that was talking about your playing your guitar, saying fantastic guitar. So you have fans and you have people who appreciate the work that you do. I am certainly one of them. Thank you for your 4 nights of wonder and exploration of the ghostly, the other side, and death. It's nothing to be afraid of, because in understanding death, we can learn the meaning of life. Thank you so much, Tim Wyatt. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. 1970s. One Sunday afternoon, I was just sitting on the stairs for some reason, and